The morning fog clung to the Potomac River as Captain Ibrahim Traoré's motorcade moved through the awakening streets of Washington, D.C. The February air carried a sharp chill that reminded him of the Harmattan winds that swept through Ouagadougou. This time of year, though, here the cold felt different, clinical, unwelcoming. Inside the black SUV, Traoré adjusted his traditional bubu, the embroidered cotton fabric, a stark contrast to the leather seats and bulletproof glass. His aide, Colonel Sawadogo, reviewed the day's schedule on his tablet. "The International Security Forum doesn't begin until noon, Excellence," Sawadogo said, "but there's been a development regarding Amadou Konaté." Traoré's jaw tightened. Konaté, a Burkinabe citizen, a teacher who had come to America on a cultural exchange program 5 years ago and stayed to pursue his doctorate. Now he faced deportation on charges that seemed manufactured at best. "The hearing?" Traoré asked. 9 o'clock, District Court. The embassy tried to intervene, but— "We go," Traoré said simply. Sawadogo hesitated. "Excellence, the protocol. You're here as a state guest for the forum. This could complicate a leader who abandons his—" "People in foreign courts has no business speaking about governance," Traoré interrupted. "We go." The D.C. District Court building loomed grey and imposing against the morning sky. As their vehicle approached, Traoré noticed the increased security presence, metal detectors at every entrance, armed guards scanning the growing crowd of morning courtgoers. Inside the courthouse, the smell of old wood and floor polish mixed with the anxiety that seemed to seep from the walls. People of all backgrounds shuffled through security, their faces wearing the universal expression of those caught in the machinery of justice, hope wrestling with resignation. Traoré and his small entourage, just Sawadogo and 2 security officers, made their way to Courtroom 4B. The Burkinabe embassy had provided the case details. Konaté's visa had allegedly expired, though records showed he'd applied for renewal months ago. The real issue, whispered in diplomatic circles, was his vocal criticism of American foreign policy in Africa, expressed in academic papers and campus debates. As they approached the courtroom doors, Officer Mitchell Barnes stood guard. A veteran. Of 20 years on the courthouse detail, Barnes prided himself on knowing who belonged and who didn't. The African man approaching in traditional dress immediately caught his attention, not the usual lawyer or defendant he was accustomed to seeing. "Excuse me," Barnes said, stepping forward, hand instinctively moving toward his badge. "This is a restricted area. Are you here for a specific case?" Traoré stopped, meeting Barnes's gaze calmly. "I am here for the Konaté hearing." Barnes frowned. "Are you his lawyer, family?" "I am here as an observer," Traoré replied. "I'm going to need to see some identification. Hand verification of your business here." Barnes' tone hardened. The man's accent, his dress, his very presence seemed to challenge some unspoken order. In the post-9/11 world, Barnes had been trained to question anything that seemed out of place. Sawadogo stepped forward, reaching for the diplomatic credentials, but Barnes held up a hand. "I'm talking to him," Barnes said sharply. Then to Traoré, "Sir, I don't think you understand. This isn't some public gallery. You can't just walk in here because you feel like it. You don't belong here." The words hung in the air. Several people passing by slowed their pace, sensing tension. Traoré remained still, his expression unchanged. "I don't belong here." "That's what I said. This is an American courtroom. We have procedures. You can't just—" "Officer Barnes." The Q, voice of Judge Patricia Holworth, cut through the hallway as she approached for the morning session. "Is there a problem?" Barnes straightened. "Your Honor, this gentleman is trying to enter the courtroom without proper clearance. He says he's here for the Konaté case, but what?" Judge Holworth asked, her eyes moving between Barnes and Traoré. "Well, he's clearly not. I mean, he doesn't look like—" Barnes struggled with his words. "Doesn't look like what, officer?" The judge pressed. "Like he belongs here," Barnes finally said, the words now sounding hollow even to his own ears. Judge Holworth's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her stance. She turned to Traoré. "Sir, may I ask who you are?" "My name is Ibrahim Traoré," he said simply. "I am here to observe the proceedings regarding Amadou Konaté, a citizen of Burkina Faso. The judge's eyes widened slightly in recognition. She had seen the security briefings about the International Security Forum, knew the names of the attending dignitaries. "Captain Traoré," she said carefully. "The President of Burkina Faso." Barnes's face drained of color. "Yes," Traoré confirmed. "Though at this moment, I am simply a man concerned about justice for one of my citizens." The hallway had grown quiet. Court clerks, lawyers, and citizens waiting for their own hearings had formed a loose circle, drawn by the unfolding drama. Judge Holworth turned to Barnes. "Officer, please escort President Traoré and his delegation into the courtroom. Front, a row observer section." Barnes's mouth opened, then closed. "Your Honor, I didn't know." "That's evident," the judge said coolly. "We'll discuss this later." As they entered the courtroom, Traoré walked past Barnes without a word, though Sawadago couldn't resist a sharp look at the officer. The courtroom was already half full. Immigration lawyers, advocacy groups, journalists who had gotten wind that something significant might happen with the Konaté case. Amadou Konaté sat at the defendant's table, his shoulders hunched. When he saw Traoré enter, his eyes widened in disbelief. He started to rise, but his lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm. As Judge Holworth took her seat, the bailiff called the court to order. But the atmosphere had already shifted. There was electricity in the air, a sense that this would not be just another deportation hearing. "Before we begin," Judge Holworth announced, "I should note for the record that we have international observers present today, including President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Officer Barnes, now stationed inside by the door, kept his eyes fixed on the floor. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney James Mitchell, shuffled his papers nervously. This was supposed to be a straightforward case. The presence of a head of state changed everything. "Your Honor," Konaté's lawyer, Maria Rodriguez, stood. "Given the unusual circumstances, I would like to request—" "Counsel," the judge interrupted. "We will proceed as scheduled. The presence of observers, regardless of their station, does not change the legal questions before us." But everyone in the room knew that wasn't entirely true. The very air seemed charged with history, the weight of colonialism, the echoes of civil rights struggles, the ongoing questions of who belonged and who decided. As the prosecutor began outlining the government's case against Konaté, Traoré sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap. But his presence filled the room, a silent reminder that the world was watching, that actions in this courtroom would ripple far beyond its walls. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, sending shafts of light through the tall windows. They illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, the worn wooden benches, the faces of those gathered, each carrying their own story of belonging or exile, acceptance or rejection. Officer Barnes shifted uncomfortably by the door, beginning to grasp that his words, "You don't belong here," had set in motion something far larger than a simple security check. In trying to enforce belonging, he had instead opened a door to its very questioning. As the first witness was called, Traoré's eyes met Konaté's briefly. In that glance was a promise. "You are not alone. You belong because I say you belong. Because we say we belong." The battle for Amadou Konaté's future had begun, but it was already clear that much more was at stake than one man's immigration status. This was about dignity, about recognition, about the right to exist in spaces that history had tried to keep closed. The morning's confrontation was just the beginning. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Mitchell had argued dozens of deportation cases, but never with a foreign president sitting 10 feet away. He could feel Traoré's presence as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, the facts are clear," Mitchell began. "Mr. Konaté's student visa expired 14 months ago. He failed to maintain legal status and has been working without authorization." "Objection," Maria Rodriguez rose. "The record shows my client applied for visa renewal well before expiration. The delay was administrative." "The law doesn't recognize administrative delays as an excuse," Mitchell countered. "Furthermore, Mr. Konaté has engaged in activities inconsistent with his stated purpose, published articles critical of U.S. foreign policy, organized protests." Judge Holworth leaned forward. Mr. Mitchell, are you suggesting that exercising First Amendment rights is grounds for removal? I'm suggesting that Mr. Konate has shown a pattern of hostility toward the United States. Your Honor, Rodriguez stood. I have an unusual request. We have in the courtroom someone who can speak to Mr. Konate's character. I ask permission to call President Ibrahim Traoré as a witness. The courtroom erupted. Mitchell jumped up. Objection. This is highly irregular. Judge Holworth raised her gavel. President Traoré, I cannot compel you to testify. You have diplomatic immunity. But if you choose to speak— Traoré stood slowly. Your Honor, I choose to speak. Not as a president claiming immunity, but as a man who understands what it means to be told you don't belong. He walked to the witness stand with measured steps. As he was sworn in, the historical weight of the moment settled over the courtroom. President Traoré, Rodriguez began, how do you know Amadou Konate? I know him as I know thousands of young Burkinabé who seek education abroad. He represents our hope that knowledge gained elsewhere can help build our nation. The prosecution suggests his criticism of American policies makes him unwelcome. Traoré's eyes found Mitchell. I have criticized American policies. Does criticism negate friendship? Does questioning mean hostility? When your founding fathers criticized British rule, were they anti-British? When Dr. King criticized American racism, was he anti-American? That's different, Mitchell started. How? The single word hung in the air. Traoré turned to the judge. Your Honor, I've spent the morning listening to arguments about whether Amadou Konate belongs here. But belonging isn't about papers or protocols. It's about contribution. It's about the courage to speak truth even when uncomfortable. He looked at Officer Barnes. This morning, your officer told me I don't belong here. Perhaps he was more right than he knew. I don't belong to the America that sees black skin and assumes threat. But I do belong to the America that Dr. King dreamed of. Judge Holworth called a 2-hour recess. Outside, crowds had swelled. You don't belong here trended globally. Inside, Officer Barnes sat alone in the cafeteria, confronting the weight of his assumptions. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. Judge Holworth arranged her papers carefully. This morning, we witnessed something unprecedented. A head of state chose to set aside diplomatic immunity to speak truth in an American courtroom. She looked at Traoré. President Traoré, your testimony reminded us that justice is not merely about law, but about humanity. She turned to Barnes. Officer Barnes, your actions this morning, while regrettable, brought into sharp focus the questions at the heart of this case. Who decides who belongs? Then to Konate. Mr. Konate, you have technically violated immigration law, but you have also embodied principles America claims to cherish: intellectual courage, community engagement, pursuit of truth. The courtroom held its breath. This court finds that removal would represent an unconscionable waste of human potential. The deportation order is hereby vacated. I am recommending immediate adjustment of status based on Mr. Konate's extraordinary contributions. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Konate collapsed, sobbing. His family rushed to embrace him. Order, Judge Holworth continued. This case has exposed fundamental flaws in how we approach immigration, how we define belonging. I am issuing a judicial recommendation that Congress review policies that penalize intellectual discourse. As Traoré prepared to leave, he passed Officer Barnes. Officer, he said quietly. Barnes straightened. Mr. President, I owe you an apology. Was a gift, Traoré interrupted. Your words created the opportunity for truth to be spoken. Sometimes, we teach best through our mistakes. He extended his hand. Barnes stared at the offered hand, then took it. The handshake was firm, meaningful, captured by photographers as a moment of reconciliation. Outside, Traoré faced the media. Today shows America is still capable of surprising itself. That justice, when truly served, recognizes no borders. That belonging is not granted by those in power, but claimed by those with courage. 6 months later, the impact continued to reverberate. Officer Barnes now traveled the country, speaking about implicit bias. His presentation, The Belonging Question, had become legendary in law enforcement circles. I used to think my job was to determine who belonged, Barnes told packed auditoriums. That morning taught me belonging isn't mine to grant or deny. Judge Holworth presided over the new commission on immigration reform. Amadou Konate, now Dr. Konate, served as an advisory member while establishing Georgetown's Center for Belonging. Studies President Traoré's book, The Courage to Belong, topped bestseller lists globally. At the UN, his speech on the universal right to belong drew thunderous applause. The Smithsonian unveiled its newest exhibit, Belonging in America. At the opening, children performed a song they'd written, You Said We Don't Belong Here, but Here Is Where We'll Stay. Our voices make the chorus that sings America Today, Barnes, attending with his family, wept openly. 10 years later, the National Museum added a permanent exhibit with bronze figures of all three men. Barnes, now retired, became an unofficial docent. I was the one who said he didn't belong, he'd tell schoolchildren. But I learned belonging isn't about where you're from, it's about what you contribute. One day, a young African girl approached him. Were you scared when you realized you were wrong? Barnes smiled. Terrified. But being scared and choosing to grow anyway, that's real courage. As Washington's cherry blossoms bloomed, Barnes reflected on how a single moment, You Don't Belong Here, had transformed into a movement. The ripples continued, each day bringing new conversations about inclusion. His phone buzzed, his daughter texting, Dad, watching your interview. Still proud of you. The work continued. Not, do you belong here, but how do we belong together? The answer, with courage, with humility, with understanding that every person carries possibility, waiting for someone to say not, you don't belong, but welcome. We've been waiting for you. The ripples continue still.